Hello, everybody. I'm Rebekah.
And I'm Luke.
And we are here today for the first ever episode of the Religious Trauma Network podcast. So
indeed. We don't exactly know what this is going to look like, but this is what it looks like now.
That's right. There'll be changes along the way and new formats, I'm sure, but here we are, our first one, giving it a shot. So, yay.
It's so good to do this. I'm really excited that that we're doing this. I'm super excited that you invited me to participate in what this is. And that's probably a good jumping off point, because I know some people have found this because they found the website, but maybe they haven't dug around yet. So can I just ask you, this is kind of your baby in a way, a little bit of a brainchild. I know there have been other minds involved,
yes.
But what is the Religious Trauma Network, Rebekah, and what are we doing?
Well, I've been in the religious trauma space for quite a while, from my own journey as well as professionally. So have you and the others, Janine and David and others that are part of our community. But I kind of began to notice there's like this gap in the religious trauma, spiritual abuse space. And I began feeling like people are getting pushed into holes. They're pushed into specific corners and saying, this is how you deconstruct your faith. This is how you do it, and then you must become an atheist, or you must stay a Christian, or here's all these rules to follow, to do this, to do that, if you have trauma, you must do it this way. And I began thinking, that's an awful lot like the fundamentalism that I left.
Right.
The checklist of do's and don'ts and have to's and musts. And I was like, what if there was a space that was just focused on healing, not telling me how, not telling me you should and you shouldn't. And so that's where this brainchild kind of started. Was we can all agree that we have religious trauma or we experienced spiritual abuse in our lives. That is the commonality. That is where we are all the same. And so I began pulling in other minds, other voices, other ideas, and saying, what if we did something together? And that's where the Religious Trauma Network was born, with David and you and Janine all coming together, throwing ideas, writing things together, developing this concept of we all agree that we have experienced the same harm, the same hurt. But where we are now, that looks different. We may not believe the same anymore. The journeys that we've taken to get there are different. And so we can encourage one another that, yes, here's our same background, but where we are today is different. But we are all looking for healing, freedom of thought, freedom of choice, and encouraging one another and empowering one another to search for healing, to search for authenticity. And, we're going to disagree sometimes. And we're going to be on different sides of a political opinion or a theological view. But that's the beauty in this, is that I think we can all still be good friends. And so it's a bit of an experiment in a way.
Believe that.
Yeah. But anyway.
Well, I am so excited about this. It's interesting for me because in a lot of ways, through my religious deconstruction and my I don't even know what you would call it, spiritual reawakening or renewal. Mm-hmm. I have in a lot of ways felt very alone. As you well know, one of the things that church is super good at is community at the local level. And unfortunately, some religious communities will sort of set a rule that the only community you can have is inside of that community. And so when you might lose your faith, one of the very first things I think a lot of people will run into is how alone they feel. Mm-hmm. Their entire network was in that group. Now they're out of the group, and they haven't been encouraged to, nor have they practiced, making connections with people in the world. And in fact, there are often very clear instructions not to mingle with people in the world. And so it creates an almost inescapable trap of loneliness. And one day I had an idea, the light came on, that light didn't come on. That light I think is dead, but the light came on and I thought, wait a minute, I'm allowed to be friends with anybody I want to be. And so I was able to sort of liberate myself from that trap, but that didn't mean that I still had a lot of people who could understand what I was going through, who wanted to talk about that stuff. And I actually found out about you and Janine and several other people by taking a religious trauma course online. And you all were presenters. And me being the sort of voracious learner that I sometimes become, I was like writing down names and like looking people up on Google. And I reached out to you all and we became friends. And we've been friends for a while now, right? It's been a minute.
Yes.
And
a few years.
And you invited me to be a part of this. And I was like, are you sure you want me? Because we don't think the same way about a lot of stuff. Yeah. So I'm super excited to be a part of it. And I'm really grateful that you reached out. And I just would say, like right at the beginning, this thing you said about how we can be in community, we can love each other, we can care about each other without believing the same things. You are the proof of concept there because you know where I'm coming from and you still invited me to be a part of this. And I really appreciate that. So thank you for that.
You got it. I'm glad you're part of it.
And
I loved how you said earlier, and I'm jumping back to that, was you said practiced making friends outside of our community. And I know we're not really talking about that, but that's a key element that I even today struggle with sometimes, is practicing. How do I make friends with people who don't think and look and talk exactly like me?
And we live in even a political environment right now where division is actually a tactical asset of politicians. And so even if you get out of a church environment or a religious environment, you still emerge from that matrix into the matrix of the American political landscape, which is also very divisive and polarizing. And so it can be really hard for a person going through a private exodus of this trauma they've been in to then emerge into this social situation that's very much like it. And so I just think this is a really important thing, and I'm so excited to be a part of it, for whatever little part I will play. But I do think it would be helpful if we could talk about what religious trauma even is. I know there's been some definition written down. Is that something you can talk about more?
Sure. It's going to be on our website under the About Us section. That'll be there. To my knowledge, there is not an official, across the board definition that everybody agrees on. Kind of people have created their own. And so this is the one that the Religious Trauma Network has developed that currently we are working from. And that is that religious trauma is the deep psychological and spiritual injury that arises from overwhelming experiences, relationships, abuses, or systemic issues within a religious context, leading to lasting adverse effects on an individual's mental, emotional, and social well-being. This trauma disrupts one's core beliefs, sense of safety, often resulting in a painful process of deconstructing and rebuilding one's identity and worldview. Religious trauma is the result of a spiritually abusive situation, system, person, experience, or belief system. And that's kind of how we've summarized what is religious trauma. Yeah,
I think that's so helpful. It's interesting because one of the talking points you set out for this conversation was talking about what was a pivotal moment in our understanding of religious trauma. I'm curious about that for you. What was the pivotal moment for you where the light came on, so to speak?
So for me, it wasn't this big moment where I recognized religious trauma in my life, because I first had to recognize that I had been abused. And abuse always has that power and control dynamic. And it's where they can use money, they can use information, it can be physical, sexual, emotional. There's so many different types of abuse, but it always has the abuser is somehow trying to control or usurp and maintain power over you or the group or the family or whatever it is. And so I do remember my daughter was very young. I'd been married for several years, and I remember sitting in my entryway. It had beautiful big glass doors. You'd step into the entryway, the staircase going up, And I don't remember why I was alone. It may have been a Sunday morning. And at that time, my husband would take our daughter to church because it was too painful for me to go. I wanted to, but every time I tried, I would be a wreck for the next 3 or 4 days. It was not healthy. And so I had taken a break. I'd taken a season away so I could get a church detox so that I could have this healing time. And it was toward the beginning of my journey. And I sat down on the stairs and I was alone. They were carpeted, tan carpet. I sat down and something just clicked in my brain. That wasn't normal. That was abuse. And so once I had that, I remember the tears streaming down my face as I saw it through the eyes of my own child. And if she were to experience that type of control, that type of power over her, not to mention the actual physical, spiritual, emotional things that had happened to me, I could understand it as abuse. And that is what opened my life into realizing this is a big deal. And so I wasn't trauma informed. I didn't understand what trauma was, but that realization of this was abuse, this was not normal, this was not okay. That is what led me down the path of understanding all that stuff. So, but let's flip that question over to you. Do you have a big aha moment where you recognized the religious trauma in your life?
So I'm a preacher's kid. I was born and raised in the non-denominational, charismatic, evangelical, fundamentalist Christian, American Christian church. So I was a tongue-speaking, demon-casting out.
Oh, you were one of them. Okay.
I was one of those guys. Really for a couple of decades, for sure. Yeah. I was in a Christian rock band, and I in high school. I think it was my senior year. I had one of these stonewashed jean jackets. It was like black and white, not blue, and I hand painted on the back in big cartoon bubble letters, "Ask me about Jesus," and I wore it out in public. I was super into this thing. So in 2010, I'm around 34, 35 years old, 34, I think. I'm living in Haiti with my wife and 3 of our kids. We're starting a film school down there. I started going to Haiti when I was 14 on short-term mission trips. So when I first encountered Haiti, and for about 30 trips from that first one, Haiti was a project. It was, and I was a colonial missionary, basically. I mean, they weren't people. They didn't have real lives. Everything was a well or an orphanage or a feeding program or something like that. And of course, saving souls for Christ. And so I did that for a lot of years. By the time we moved there in 2009 and we're living there, I was pretty well on my way out of believing some of that stuff. I was very much in deconstruction. We didn't move to Haiti to do missionary work per se. We moved there to teach storytelling. So in 2010, on January 12th, there was this really big earthquake that was all over CNN. It was all over the news. We were there at that time, living in the north. So we felt it, but there was no carnage where we were. But the very next morning, being the kind of person who already had moved his family to Haiti, you bet your bottom dollar I was the guy out the door the next morning, and I was on my way to the ground zero. And I spent 4 weeks down there, some with friends and colleagues and some by myself. I had no business being there. I didn't have a job. I didn't really have a purpose. And so I made my own purpose. And because we were there to do schools, I decided I'll go count fallen schools and sort of, paint a picture of how big this education problem is now that the earthquake has happened. And so when you chase after things that have collapsed, you see a lot of bad stuff. And I didn't know what I was getting into, and I developed PTSD. And I'm like going real quick here. At some point after that, my wife gave me an ultimatum. She's like, I'm taking the kids. We're going back to the States. You can come with, but if you do, you have to get help, because she knew I was gone. She said, or you can stay and do this, but if you stay, that's it. We're done. I went home. Again, these are big, slow moves and a lot of pain and screaming and crying, but I came home. I put off getting help for PTSD for about 3.5 years. And because we were now back in the States and we had things like electricity and grocery stores and paved roads and, things like that, my wife didn't really lean on me for that I have to get help thing. So for about 3.5 years, I just, everybody else had a problem. I didn't. And then I had a snap. One night, I just like completely, the cheese slipped off my cracker. I was ripping my clothes off myself. Actually came down to last thing on me was my wedding ring. It was a gold band and I couldn't get it off. I was feeling trapped inside of my body, and it had to do with the PTSD of seeing all the bad stuff that happens.
Yeah.
And so it was on the other side of that horrific experience that I thought, okay, maybe I have a problem and maybe I'll get some help.
Maybe. Yeah.
So being a video guy my whole life, being a film lover and a wannabe filmmaker, I thought, I know what I'll do. I made a documentary about trauma and about healing from trauma. I told all my friends it was going to take me a year. It took 6. A lot of that is because when you're healing, you don't, there's no gas pedal where you get to decide how fast you go. It happens. And you respond. And then, for me, healing was sort of like some progress. Then I have to live in that spot for a while and reacclimate to the new altitude or whatever. You recently relocated to the mountains, so that metaphor is for you.
Thank you.
But along the way in that healing, I realized that the PTSD from my mid-30s was triggered from stuff from my childhood, early childhood, that had been stored in my body, not in my mind as stories or pictures or words, but as body sensations, because it happened to me pre-language or right when I was learning language. And so that unlocked a Pandora's box where I realized, wait a minute, this ideal, perfect thing that I thought I grew up in was far from ideal, was definitely not perfect. And I endured a lot of abuse in the sense that it registered to my body as abuse. The complicated thing I had to come into contact with is that the people, for example, I got spanked a lot because I was physically, as a young child who didn't have the mental capacity, nor the words, nor the picture memory to articulate and process like an adult might. I was just expressing in bad behavior. And so in a Christian home, spare the rod, spoil the child. So a lot of trauma was identified as spiritual trouble. And instead of being dealt with in the way you would deal with trauma, it was dealt with by casting out demons and praying over me or spanking me a lot. And my parents legitimately were trying to shape me into a person who would not go to hell. I mean, I'm dumbing it down, but that's the idea. So what's interesting about it is I know now, it took me some time to work through this, but I know now that they didn't come up with the ideas that were hurting me. They just believed them. And they were trying to help me while they were hurting me. Yeah. And we've talked about this, by the way. I have a good relationship with my parents still. We talk all the time. And they know I talk about this stuff, and they know I'm a part of this network. But so it was through that I realized, it was through healing from PTSD that I realized that had an earlier root. And then I started looking at that, and then I took that religious trauma course, and I started to go, I was taking it because I thought, I used to be religious, and I do believe trauma is a real thing. And so I want to take my experience with religion and my experience with trauma and try to help people. And as I was learning about religious trauma, then it occurred to me, I actually have that too. Like I wouldn't have put those words to it, right? But I have religious trauma. And so that's kind of how I came. I mean, that's not kind of, that's exactly how I came to this. Yeah. And that's why it's really important to me.
So when you started this journey of looking for healing, what did you think it meant? And what did you think it looked like? And then today, how would you define the healing?
When I was working on the trauma film, do I want to say healing or do I want to say recovery? Are they the same thing? Like I kind of struggle with that. Now I feel pretty clear that they are different things. But they're both sort of on the level of being like, you get to choose which one's more important or whether they're both sort of equally important. Healing for me, if you were to lose a limb and, the doctors were able to stop the bleeding and make it so you're going to survive, you're not going to get your limb back. So healing in that case is not regeneration of lost things. It can just basically be a return to stasis. to where I'm not psychologically or emotionally bleeding out, as going back to the leg example. That to me is healing. It's basically like getting you back to a place where you can move forward if you want, or stay still, but you're just not bleeding out. You're not dying. That's healing. Recovery, and I think recovery is really interesting in the context of religious trauma, because recovery is about reclaiming some essential part of you that has either been lost or locked away or restricted or prohibited. And so I think about, for example, the doctrine of original sin. Whether or not you ever had anybody hit you for religious purposes, to even tell someone that they are fundamentally not good enough for God, that something has to happen for there to be a fix, for you to be worthy or whatever. And this, of course, this is some of my interpretation of where I'm at. This doesn't apply necessarily to everyone in the network, but yes. I think an idea like original sin is psychologically damaging in a way that it can tell a young child, especially if you're learning this in your formative years, it can tell a young child that who you essentially are is blech, and we got to do better. And if you don't do better, if you can't, let God redeem you from being blech, then there could be hell to pay. And so it's got this incredibly deep, dark, psychological terror thing that happens. Yeah. Recovery in that case is trying to access a part of me that was pure and undamaged by that I believe is still in there. It's the ability to go, well, you talked about like some of the signs of spiritual abuse have to do with like thought control, right? So recovery in that example would be, I can have my own thoughts. I can trust my thoughts. Yes. I don't have to immediately dismiss them because I am a sinful creature and nothing that comes out of me could possibly be worth anything. That would be recovery from that, that thing where you're told that your ideas, your sense of self has no value. And you say, and for me, it's in my 40s. I look back and I go, as a 40-year-old, I hereby disagree with the assessment that I was fundamentally bleh. I'm not fundamentally bleh. When I look at anybody else's baby or a kitten, I just see innocence and possibility and beauty. I'm that too. So it's for me, being able to say that is recovery. Yeah. So those two things are kind of different. You could see why I think they could be equally important. What about you? Where are you with this idea?
When I first began recognizing that I had a lot of boo-boos, I thought that healing just meant it got better. That, oh, sure, there might be a scar, but the scar is like a memory. And so I went in kind of with the romantic idea that healing means that if I go to therapy and read some books and, kind of change a few things, that I'm just going to be better. And it's not going to hurt me anymore. It's not going to bother me anymore. And that was definitely the romantic view. Yeah. Because that's not what healing is. But yet we kind of had that idea that it's no different than healing from a surgery or healing from a skinned up knee, or if you popped a zit on your face, like it'll eventually get better and look better and feel better. And I had to learn through many years of that not happening, that that's not what healing really is. And so today I see healing as self-awareness. It's me knowing myself, knowing my story, knowing what triggers me, understanding why I'm reacting the way I'm reacting, or being curious enough to dig in a little bit more so I can understand myself better. It's also recognizing how my behaviors and my patterns, my triggers, when I have a bad day or I don't want to get out of bed or the tears come for no reason, it's recognizing how all of those things impact the people around me. My husband, my child, my friends, the friends I don't text back for like 2 weeks at a time because I'm in a spot. And so for me, that's what healing looks like, it's this journey and it's becoming aware. Also, though, healing is gaining resilience. And resilience is something I was never taught. I had no freaking idea what resilience was. And it took Janine coming into my life to help me understand what resilience was. And Resilience doesn't mean that something bad didn't happen or that something bad won't happen again. But it's learning to gain those tools that, number one, I survived the last time. Here's what helped and here's what didn't. How can we use this again or find a different tool that can help us? But resilience also means you're not alone. Part of healing and resilience means that there's somebody that you rely on that comes to you. As a child, that should ideally be your caregiver, the mom, the dad, the person who's raising you, the adult in your life that's caring, that's present, that's with you through the hard thing. Again, as parents, we want to save our children from hurting, from having bad things happen around them or to them. But that's not reality. We can't do that. We're not Superman. Like, we can't just rush in and protect our children from all the bad things. But we can be present with them when something hurtful, painful, bad, ugly, scary, grief-worthy happens in their life. And that's how we can teach resilience to our children, is to walk alongside them. They get to see us grieve when someone we love dies, and that's healthy. They get to see us work through those triggers. Then say, you know what, mommy messed up. I'm sorry. Or mommy's triggered today. Here, you don't need to know the whole story why, but I'm sorry that my got in the way of your day. And I recognize that had an impact on your life today. I'm still working on it. So it's being vulnerable and honest with our children. And so healing doesn't mean it's not going to keep hurting. It just means that we've been able to recognize the why, or willing to learn the why, and we are able to look for tools and set new patterns to move forward. And then the biggest part of it for me is healing. I try to heal so that I do not repeat the same toxic, abusive, controlling, coercive, manipulative patterns that were generationally handed down to me. Generationally is through my biological family, through the people that were influences in my life, because so often in religious spaces, parenting is kind of handed out a little bit. Like, you go to these courses, you go to these conferences, you go to these things, and that's supposed to help educate and train you and be kind of like a pseudo parent in a way. But then there's also religious generational patterns through your denomination, through whoever your pastor was, your Sunday school teacher. And so when we heal, when we focus on ourselves, and this is why the Religious Trauma Network to me is so important, is because we're focusing on healing, not just starting something new. Individual healing comes first before anybody dares start a new way to minister, a new way to do this, a new way to do that. Because if we are not healed, if we do not have that self-awareness and those tools, the resilience and the toolkit that we need to help manage ourselves, we will repeat the same harmful patterns that we're trying to get over.
So you talked about the kind of healing almost as a responsibility, not just an opportunity to help yourself, but as a responsibility to, for the people around you, that sort of thing. I love that. You talked about this earlier in this conversation. You talked about your inner child. I have conversations with my inner child on the regular. And when I was able to finally own a lot of my trauma, and when I say own, for me, that included not only accepting it internally, but then vocalizing it, speaking it into the world, like saying to people, hey, I was traumatized, both the trauma from the earthquake and the religious trauma. There's a sense for me that part of my healing has included the need to say it happened. And to know, like, I'm saying it happened at a time when some of the people who did it to me are still alive to hear that. So it's not just an easy thing to do.
No,
and to figure out how to do that without cannibalizing the people that I love.
And that's why it was important. You said it earlier that your parents were doing what they were taught to do.
Absolutely.
So that's why that is important. Yeah.
Yes, there's a component of doing it for your loved ones that comes with healing. But my inner child, one time, he kind of like reached up and tugged on my shirt and was like, hey you, hey me,
hey
old me. He told me that he was really grateful that I had owned and admitted, and sort of vocalized the trauma. because it made him feel seen. It made him feel like he wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
Because essentially when you stand up and own it publicly, you're saying to your wounded self, like, I take that part of me seriously, and
Yes.
I'm telling everybody what happened to that part of me. So there was this moment where that part of me was thanking me for that, but then he came kind of soft with a little bit of a discontent, a displeasure. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, right? But it kind of went like, if you lived in a community and there was a lion jumping out and eating people, and for a while nobody knew what was happening. People were just disappearing, or you would see remnants of people. Oh my God, like some horrible things happening. And there comes a moment, and this would be in the metaphor, this would be the moment of recognizing my trauma, owning my trauma, where I figure out that there's a lion eating us. I go, this isn't some specter. This is a very real world thing that's wounding us, and it needs to be called out. But then my child was like, so you've done that. Good job. Thank you. I feel seen. But he's like, but if the lion's eating people, shouldn't we hunt the lion? Shouldn't we stop? Like, is it enough to go in your house and lock the door and go, we know there's a lion. Whew. I hope everybody else figures that out.
Text your BFF. Okay.
Text your BFF. It was like my inner child was saying, like, how can you say you totally take me seriously if you're not trying to help other people who are being eaten by the lion, or if you're not trying to stop the lion entirely? And so I think that extending that circle, like you drew it to include your family, you can extend that to include strangers who are being eaten by the lion, who you say deep inside, like, I don't want anybody to be eaten by this lion. I want everybody, whether they stay a Christian or not, whether they call themselves spiritual or an atheist, I don't want people to be eaten up by these bad ideas any longer. It's not enough for me to save myself. And I'll only tag that with this last thing, and then I want to toss back to you for your idea here on this. But there are people who don't identify as having had religious trauma. There may be, for example, spiritual leaders, ministers, people in communities like churches who themselves don't have this problem. They may have even heard original sin or the doctrine of eternal torment in hell, and it didn't damage them like it damaged me. And they go like, so what? I think that it's really critical, and you pointed this out, because if you are in any kind of a leadership role with people who are on a spiritual journey, whether or not you've been wounded, you need to know what this thing is so that A, you won't do it accidentally, and B, so that you won't have other people around you, because usually in ministry there's lots of people involved. You won't have other people doing it. And C, so even if nobody ever does it, you're still going to have people coming through your door with this complex problem, and they're going to need help. And you want to be helpful, and they need that. So what do you think about that? Is there an obligation piece to this, do you think?
I often tell people to look at the scriptural story, the Bible story, of the Good Samaritan. And the Good Samaritan, he had power. He was wealthier. He was, was well-to-do. And he was walking along one day, and there was this hurt guy by the side of the road. And he could tell very clearly that he was not of the same tribe or not of the same race as he was. That one was without question. But he didn't stop and say, okay, how do you identify? What church do you go to? Are you even religious? Oh, that's not really a thing. He just goes, oh my goodness, you're hurting, and I have the resources to help. Let me go out of my way to help a hurting, wounded, broken person. That's it.
I love that. Yeah.
And so it's not our job to tell people if they're actually hurt or not. Because trauma, as we've learned, one thing that's a trauma to someone else is not a trauma to somebody else.
Right.
And so something that happens to a 5-year-old, the same thing could happen to a 10-year-old, and they have different reactions. And so for you to go in and say, that's not really a thing, that's not really hurt, honestly, that's pretty pious. Because who are you to say, it's like a little child falls down and, hurts themselves. And you go, oh, don't worry, you're okay, get up. Well, they're bleeding. They might need a hug. That's not coddling. They actually had something that caused them pain. And so that's kind of how I view that one, as it's not our job to tell people if they're hurt or not. It is our job to help people who said that they are hurting.
And there is a need to be informed when that moment, should that moment arrive. You need to be informed.
It's humility to recognize, and I still remember teaching all the purity culture stuff when I was a youth leader. And we talked about plucking the petals off the rose and, linking hands with every boyfriend you've ever had. And there's not much of you left when you get to the altar. And I have to take accountability for the things I was taught that I passed on. And so just because you don't know that you've harmed someone, just because that doesn't mean you haven't. And so that's the same thing. Once you have become aware that something you have done, something you have taught, something that, you've enforced in a community has caused harm, then absolutely you have the responsibility, whether you intended to or not. It's as in a marriage. It's if your husband or your wife or your partner comes to you and says, this hurt me. What kind of partner are you if you're like, whatever, that's your problem? Right. It's the same thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I'm reminded of, when I was, heavily in the church and was out there proselytizing and, doing the whole thing. I remember we would talk about Pascal's wager, Blaise Pascal. And there was basically this idea, because people, we were always in apologetics. We were always trying to figure out how to talk to people who wanted to say that we were, crazy or we didn't know what we were talking about. Yeah, greatest comebacks. And so the Blaise Pascal one, is this idea he would talk about, it's Pascal's wager. Is it, when you think about, is this real or not? Is the God of the Bible, is the story of even hell, is this all real or not? Blaise Pascal would say, it would be better to believe it's real and act accordingly and find out you're wrong and it's nothing than to not believe that it's real, do whatever you want with your life, and then die and find out it was something. And to the first side of that argument, if you live your life according to the scriptures and then you die and there is no, heaven to be found or whatever, what have you really lost? What bad has really happened? And we would use this as an argument. And this is where the religious trauma thing comes crashing in and says, I can tell you what bad could come from it still. Like, it isn't necessarily a net good just because the good guys say they're good guys or this kind of thing. I love what you said about we don't get to decide whether a person is hurt or not. It reminds me of this idea that abuse is determined by the abused, not necessarily by the abuser. And it can be tricky. So I want to talk to you about this. So my wife was absolutely, definitely in a cult. Okay. And no question about it. Her grandmother was a self-declared prophet. All kinds of stuff was going on. It was a cult, no question. At the time, I was still my evangelical self, and we knew each other at school, and I was going to rescue her from her cult. As time has gone by, as I've deconstructed, as I've learned about my religious trauma, I do run into a lot of people who will look at my experience, and because it was in a church, and there was a Bible involved, and there were specific doctrinal things, there are people who look at me and say, that was a cult. And I compare what I went through to what my wife went through, and I'm like, I don't think I was in a cult. I didn't feel trapped, although I was young. I couldn't really go anywhere. But what kid can sort of leave whatever their parents are doing?
Not when you're a minor.
That doesn't necessarily mean I was in a cult. Questions for me were not discouraged. I was allowed to ask questions. I do know now, I do recognize now, that any time I would ask an honest question, I did always get the party line answer by the time it was all said and done. So I believed I was free to ask questions, but I didn't realize I was only getting one answer. But still, I was raised believing that questions were okay. So that's another reason why I don't feel like my experience was a cult. So I think this is another thing that happens, and I want to hear you talk about this, because where we don't get to decide what is or isn't trauma for someone, you're going to, I think, if you're a person who's dealing with religious trauma, especially in your own experience, you're going to be questioning not just was I traumatized by religious thinking, but was I in a cult, or was I just in a regular old church? Are churches cults? And so there's this thing that happens where some people who say for themselves, figure out I was in a cult, they will be very forceful about making you admit that you were in a cult. So you can even find in the healing community, you can find people who are like, I need you to say it the way I understand it.
Yeah.
What do you run into that, and how do you deal with that?
Oh, absolutely. And again, that's part of why I had this vision for Religious Trauma Network, because that was another one of the corners people were being pushed into. And sometimes people can't see it yet that they were in a cult. Other times, they're being told it was, when it may have been a high control or a high demand group. And so, honestly, I believe in the world right now, cult is being redefined. Because before we saw it as David Koresh and drink the Kool-Aid, and, you're wearing robes and saying chants, and it's very, more clearly something occult based. And so that's kind of how cult was viewed. Because even as a child, I remember people telling me that I was part of IBLP, Bill Gothard's organization. And I remember family members even questioning, is this a cult? And we were taught how to say, well, we're not a cult because, and I look now and I say,
which feels a little culty.
And now I go, oh, actually, yeah, it was a cult. And so the very basics were a good place to start. And the book I'm currently writing, I just finished the whole section on this, so I can't quote it all verbatim, but a good starting point is actually Steve Hassan's BITE model of authoritarian control. And it's a starting point. And that would be BITE, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. Are your behaviors, must you behave a specific way to stay inside that community or that group? What happens if you behave differently? Information, are there only approved sources? You could only read, from these authors or from these organizations. There's no TV, no radio, no this, or only that one program, or only that one. So there's lots of guidelines and rules and structures around where you can get your information and the type of information that you can read. Can you read varying thought or not? Thought control. The first thing that always comes to mind is take your thought captive, lock it up and throw it away. That was a Bill Gothard thing. We had the scripture verse about taking our thought captive for Christ. But we are taught that even our thoughts can be sin. Your thoughts can break God's heart. And so thought control is that, as well as it ties into what I believe about politics, what I believe about God, what I believe about all of these other things. We're not even allowed to explore in our minds something different than what we're taught in the community, the group, the home. And by home, I do mean sometimes there are small family cults. And then emotion control. I was taught that anger was a sin and that it was wrong for me to feel anger. So as a child, you could get whatever your sibling does to you and you feel angry, mommy, mommy, mommy. Well, he gets in trouble and you do too because you felt anger. And so our emotions are controlled either in the sense of these hyper emotional worship type services where we are hyped up and our emotions are controlled and we're manipulated in that way into believing something or doing something or giving money or volunteering or whatever it is. Or it's the emotion control of we're not allowed to have certain emotions or only certain emotions are permissible. And so that's a really great place to start if you're questioning, is this a cult or was this just another church? But then look to the leadership outside of that. Can you question the leader? What happens if someone questions the leader? Can you even access the leader? Are you able to schedule an appointment and sit down and talk to someone about your concerns? Does everybody look the same? Does everybody wear the same type of clothes, listen to the same music, go to the same places? Is there any diversity on any level within that community? I'm trying to think. There's so many ways, but those are the first ones that I would come to that would say, is this? And so there is a difference between cult and high demand or high control group.
I also think for my purposes, and I don't know if you agree or not with this, but I think for my purposes, I still don't feel, for me, I still don't feel like it's ultimately too important for me to call it one thing or another. I know what the trauma was. I know what the damage was.
Yeah.
Whether it happened in a Ford Explorer or a Chevy Malibu, it happened. And so the container for me, some people, I think, knowing that and defining that and declaring what it was would definitely be very helpful for them.
Yes. But for others like yourself.
For me, but for me, I would say it doesn't have to be a thing that you get stuck on, because I know there have to be other people, because we all run into people like us out there who are also like, that's a place where I'm stuck. I don't know if I was in a cult or not. And to that person, I would just say, you get to decide whether that matters to you or not.
And I would say, why does it matter to me? Ask yourself that question.
Why does it matter?
What will this change? How will this impact me going forward? And so just really kind of dig into that a little bit, if that is something that you're questioning. And your response and my response, it's okay. And that's the point. Like your journey, I don't need to know if I was in a cult. Mine, I would recognize, several different cults have impacted my entire life. And I did, like you said, I hung out there for a little while. And then I realized I don't want to be this like ex-cult girl to become part of my identity. It is an experience that I had. It's something that I lived through. It's something that happened to me. But it's not who Rebekah has to be going forward.
I know for me, I definitely I made contact with the influence of cults. I know that if you take the bite model and apply it to my upbringing, certainly somebody could interpret my upbringing as not fitting that very well, but it would be very easy. And like when you're going through the list, I'm going like, check, 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 some to varying degrees. Some people had a lot more of those things, but I had, so you talked about it's a term that's being redefined. I think that's really important to recognize. For me, it also comes down to, like, I still love and cherish many of those people who were responsible for me being in that situation. I still have and want to have healthy relationships, which is another indicator that maybe it wasn't at least as high a cult as it could have been. There's a part of me that goes, I want to keep some things. I want to salvage some things. I don't just want to blow the whole thing up. And so when it comes to, sometimes when we identify a thing, part of the job, you talked about compartmentalizing, like sometimes, if I'm going to call it a cult, then there's a part of me that's going to go, how can you reconcile hanging out with these people anymore then? And it's like, well, I want to hang out with them. Well, then maybe, so I guess the point here for me is just that people feel free to kind of hold it however they need to hold it so it's useful. I also like the idea that you don't have to figure everything out all at once. No. Like that may be a thing I come back to in 5 or 10 years and go, now that I've really spent some time with it, I feel this way about it. And that'll be fine. Yeah. Or maybe I won't.
If you realize you were in a cult or not, if you realize it had cult-like tendencies, if you realize it was a high demand group, if you realize it's just a church, again, we're labeling, we're putting it in a box to make sense of it as humans. Some of us, like me, that was helpful for me. For you, not so much. If you want to keep relationships with people who mattered, who poured into your life, who was your music teacher, your Sunday school teacher, your best friend in high school and college, but you're on the different pages now, that's okay. If boundaries are in place and boundaries are respected. And that's the point of this. Often, estrangement or loss of relationship happens. It does. When we're processing, when there's words like abuse, neglect, those things come up. Often those relationships, they cannot be mended unless the people who've caused the harm come forward and take responsibility and do the right steps for reconciliation, which I don't see super, super often, especially with severe abuse situations. But then again, it is the victim's choice, and there is no guilt or shame put on them, whatever their choice is in those situations. But I still have friends from way back when, and we're not on the same page. I have friends coming forward that we're not on the same page, new friends that I've made, whether it's politically or am I Christian, am I not Christian? What do I believe about this theology or that theology? Like you mentioned atonement theories and original sin. And I have friends now all over the place on all of this stuff. But what we can come back to, and even as I've coached, usually women, they'll say my husband and I are not on the same page anymore on these beliefs. So how do you navigate a marriage where you and your spouse or you and your partner are not on the same page anymore? Because when we got married, we all checked all the same boxes on our little lists. And if he believes this and loves children and wants to be right. So now that we're not, what do we do about it? And so whether you're trying to maintain relationships with people from your past or there's people in the present, I just look at what are your common values? Are your morals and values aligned? And can boundaries be respected? And a key part to boundaries is if you're the one who sets the boundary, it's your job to keep that boundary. Such as we don't talk about vaccines and presidential elections at Thanksgiving dinner table with all the family.
Right.
You have to go, oh, reminder, we all agreed to this. Hello, we're not doing that. You have to be the one who keeps that boundary. And so it can be healthy. Not it always is, but it can be healthy for you given the person, given the situation. And it is possible to have good friends from the past, from the churches, from the ministries, from the programs where you participated in that you no longer believe in. And
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we don't have to lose relationships, but what I see is more common than not. It's the people from our past who can't. They can't stay friends with us.
Right.
It's not us who are not willing.
Oh, yeah.
And a big piece of it is, and this was a huge moment for me in my journey, because at first it was like, the lion is here. We got to tell everybody, we got to stop everything. And I got to go out and I have to, and while I still do that, I want to be part of the solution, not just screaming about the problem.
Yeah.
And it becomes this weird, because I have a right as the person who survived these things to speak about them because this negatively impacted me. That is my story. And it is my right to speak about these systems that caused harm to me. But the part of my healing was when I realized I have the right to not believe any of this stuff anymore. I have the right to not participate in these systems that have created harm. But the people I'm leaving behind have just as big a right to believe those things and stay in those systems. Now, I can say, here's my story of how it caused me harm. But if I truly believe in freedom of choice and freedom of thought, that whole BITE model, if I believe in those freedoms, then you have the freedom to believe something that hurt me, that hurt people I care about. And so when I had that realization, that's when it became, okay, how do I become part of this solution? Not just screaming, there's a problem, these guys are bad, run away, this is horrible. How do I create solutions?
Yeah, I love that. I also think, that, in my healing journey, and I've heard a lot of stories from others, that one thing that can really add an exciting dimension to healing is when while you're healing, you're also helping other people.
Yes.
Whether that's with their healing or their recovery or their escape or just you're just not judging them while they're going through some of these really tough struggles. Because sometimes deciding whether to unhook from an ideology isn't just as simple as, am I going to unhook from some ideas? It's, am I going to unhook from a lot of people, a lot of invested time and energy and resources. Maybe they know secrets that I have. And there's so much. And
it's scary.
It's really scary. Or can
so
be.
Many of us, if you're in ministry, that's been your life. That's where you get your money. That's how you support your family.
Yeah.
That's been your career.
Absolutely.
And so I've heard it said that people choosing to walk away from their church, from their denomination, from their faith, whatever level of that choice that you've made, it's often like a woman leaving an abusive husband. The level of courage, the level of commitment, and and what you're leaving behind, an entire support system, like you were saying, your friends, your money.
Maybe your kids.
That's where I was going next. You don't know what's going to happen. And because it's become your whole world, that's everything you've ever known. This choice has not been made lightly. Whether I am deconstructing my Baptist faith and I become Catholic, or if I'm deconstructing my faith and I become atheist, or I choose to stay Christian, but I'm never going to church again, or wherever you land, this is not something that people do lightly. And that is something that it's not just this sexy thing that people start doing. No, it is not. It is hard. It is life-threatening. It takes commitment and intention, and it is done organically, because you would not disrupt your life in such a great way were it not real and very true to you.
Absolutely.
I'm going to throw that in there.
No, I think that's super important. I would almost say, like, if somebody is going, well, do I have religious trauma or not? One little thought exercise you could do just inside of your mind is to think about changing everything and see how that feels. Like the idea of like unhooking from the group and stop believing those things. Like just
would people call
start
you
to
or
take
not?
things out and see how your body reacts. Because one thing I think is really fascinating that I run into just anecdotally. I don't do anything about it. I don't know if there's anything to do about it, but I've noticed a difference in my experience of religious trauma as a person who literally was born into the ideas.
Yes.
Versus someone who came to them like in their 20s or 30s and became hurt. Not that that's not also capable of traumatizing you. It absolutely is. But I have found, and this is something I'm sharing for people who may find themselves in this similar situation. Maybe you were born into some of these ideas, and you are, in your view, you've experienced a lot of healing and recovery, and you know, there's a lot that's great, but like you talked about, you might go, but it's still really hard, and I feel like I should be over it by now. To those people, I would simply say, some of these ideas that come in at that early of an age, they really do become a part of your physical body. You could take them out of your brain as ideas, and your body will still feel repulsed or uncomfortable, or you know, you'll have phobias or impulses or urges that are like, whoa, like I don't even believe this anymore. And I am 49. I am at least a decade outside of believing the things that I believed in that way. I am a raging agnostic. Atheists hate that. They want me to be an atheist. Christians sometimes hate that because they really want me to confess Jesus as Lord. I just am, I'm parked at this, and I think it's important to share this just briefly because we're not just BSing here when we say we're not all the same people who are a part of this network. We do actually, in some cases, believe very different things, but we come together on this idea that ideas and practices can be very damaging. And in this particular case, that's not just a religious thing. That's true of all kinds of ideas and practices. I don't know that I ever expect before I die to be fully rid of that initial hit that hits me when something comes at me that triggers an early response. What has happened is I've gained the capacity to get in front of how I respond, or really how I react. Typically, it would be like trigger, reaction, and there wasn't a lot of thought. Now it's trigger, pause, breath. Maybe I've thought about it 100 times before, and I'm ready to respond.
I felt this before. I know how to manage it.
I know how to do this, but it doesn't stop me from feeling the trigger.
Nope.
Like that still shows up. So if you're there, I want to just encourage you to, like, that. I don't know that you're doing anything wrong. It actually is, in my opinion, reflective of really how deeply these ideas bury their way into your tissues, the issues in the tissues. And so just be encouraged if a lot of this is resonating, but you feel like, you know, I should be over this by now.
As we record this, it's the beginning of the holiday season. And I texted our group of people, you, David, and Janine, and I was like, I just made this Jell-O salad. And I'm sure everybody's like, so what? You know, like, so you made the 1950s Jell-O salad. Great for you. But I literally made it like this last weekend, a couple days ago. And it was the first time I made it in 15, 16, maybe 17 years. And it's because I was preparing for, we're going to have a bunch of family members come for Thanksgiving. And I was preparing the menu. And so, okay, who's going to bring what? And I'm going to make this, and who's going to do whatever. And I remembered this Jell-O salad that we always had for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I'd forgotten about it. I'd blocked it out. And all these years later, holidays have always been very difficult for me, extremely difficult. Because again, I was born in this tradition. I went to the same church until I'd been married for a while. So my whole life I went to the same church. But everything about the holidays was a religious tradition. There was nothing that didn't have religious meaning to me. And so holidays have been so triggering. And so I made this Jell-O salad. And that was the sign of, it's not that it's easy for me, but I was able to remember something I'd forgotten. For the first time in 15, 16 years, I made something I used to love as a child, and it didn't bring the negative emotions to me. I remembered the hurt. I remembered who used to make it and the hurt that that person caused to me, but I was able to make it and enjoy it. But could I have done that 5 years ago? Absolutely not. And so what you were saying is very good.
I think it points to two other things I feel compelled to just like stick a flag in. Okay. One of them is the idea of post-traumatic growth. We don't hear enough about this in any post-trauma talk. I think we need to hear a lot more people say, like, it isn't just about, fixing the house that got the roof ripped off of it. You can decorate again. You can repaint. You could move. You could take an ownership of your future. It's not just about damage control. There is growth and renewal and new creation on the other side of healing from trauma. And then the other thing I want to say, and this was hard for me to make contact with at first, but it was important that I did, is that not every single thing in my traumatic backstory has amounted to bad things in my life. So, for example, I'm good at speaking. I'm good at I'm an introvert.
You are a great storyteller.
I can be an ambivert. Like I draw my strength from being alone or with my core people, but I can get out there on a stage. Like the fear isn't a factor. That is directly attributable to my time evangelizing and going out on street missions and all this kind of stuff. And so that's just one example. But when I have found that when I look back at my past, if all I am willing to even look for is pain and damage, then no wonder it feels so helpless and hopeless and futile to find joy, because the truth is that even in the midst of some of my darkest places, I was winning in some ways, and I was getting stronger in some way. I was certainly being taken down and weakened in other ways. But a part of like having gone through it is if you go through it and you say it's that resilience piece. Resilience is something that despite all that I lost or all that was broken or all that was damaged, resilience is I still managed to stick a few pieces of gold in my pocket along the way. And I still managed to come out with something to be like, yes, I did this. It's not a total loss. And so I think sometimes in our commitment to heal, we almost tell that inner part of us, like, I will refuse to find anything good about this. And I understand that. And I did that for a while.
Look for the sparkles.
I am only pointing this out to say, if you can find the time, if you can find the grace and the space for yourself to also go back and acknowledge, here's how I was made stronger. So, for example, even our ability to do this, to have a religious trauma network, like to go from being told you're better seen and not heard, and to now be, we're going to say whatever we need to say, like that strength comes from your experience as well.
I love it because I have this idea in my mind, like, I don't know about you, but I was part of the homeschool world, started in, the 80s with Rushdoony and all that. And I was taught that I was part of the Joshua generation that was going to take over the United States and make it a Christian nation again, Christian nationalism. And we were going to take over America for Christ. And we were going to change the world because we were the Joshua generation. And it dawned on me one day, they're not that wrong. And I was like, with you and me and Janine and David and our advisory team, I'm like, we're making a difference in the world. There right now, it is nothing like they thought we would be doing. It's the opposite kind of what they told us we were going to do. But we are making a difference because I have spoken on stage in front of thousands of people. I have played the piano and led choirs and had, whole audiences of 600 children I've had to lead in songs and rhymes and Bible verses. And we have led people. We have spoken. We have written. And here we are. And here we are saying, here we are. Yeah.
I'm excited to learn who we're going to encounter through this experience, because it's just this small group of us now. But I've heard you talk. We talk behind the scenes about how excited we are to meet the people who are going to come forward and become a part of this and engage with this and make it their own and find ways to take it into the world. Talk about just your vision and your hope for this as we kind of close this out. And what do you want to see happen? And how do you want to invite people to engage with this? And, what is there for people to do here?
Well, since we are new and we're just starting, right now we have a lot of ideas. We want to get it, kick-started and going first. All of us have day jobs or day responsibilities. And so this is not our full-time gig. But the concept is we've found each other and we've realized that we work well together. And we want to do something that is providing solutions and helping meet the needs of people who are hurting. And we have some ideas of where we might go. I think we're going to listen to the people who find us and start listening to what are people asking for. Here's what we think they're going to want. But I mean, my big vision, my biggest thing is that we would become well known, that we would become the place that people know there's no stupid question. There's no stupid, I'm wondering about believing this, or I don't know what I think about that. Or I need a safe place to land. And I would love us to be that place for people where, yes, if you're in leadership and you need some training, you need somebody to talk to about I've noticed this in my congregation or in my counseling work or in whatever it is, and I need some support. Again, that's why we are the network here. We'd like to be able to help point you to the person or the resources that can help you get either the training or the book you need to read or whatever it might be. So my vision is just creating a community where there are so many resources, no matter what it is you need, as you are trying to heal from the common background of religious trauma. And I also see this as a very diverse place, and diversity in the purest sense of the word, which means it's not just the colors of our skin. It is diverse thought, diverse ages, diverse, you keep going down the list. And so this core group of people that we're starting with, it may change and morph over time. And like we said, we all have different backgrounds. There's people with different ages. There's people with different beliefs right now that we're starting with our core team and as well as our advisory panel. And I think it can show us again that people have tried to divide us our whole lives and tried to say it's us versus them our whole lives. If you don't believe this, it's us four and no more. You can't hang out with me if you don't believe like I do. And I'm hoping we can show people that doesn't have to be the case, and that we can all love one another and build a community on the commonality of we've been hurt and we're all searching for healing. And sure, I got big plans, big visions, some ideas, but ultimately we win if we create a safe community where people can be different, ask questions, and find resources that can help them on their journey, that empower them to think for themselves, gain new knowledge, make those decisions, just figure out what they want to believe or who they are, and ultimately have a community knowing the biggest thing is you're not alone and you're not crazy for asking these questions or thinking those thoughts. So, yeah.
So good. So good.
If you met someone who was just starting this whole, I think it's religious trauma, what would you tell them as someone starts this religious trauma healing journey?
I think, like, for me, the biggest personal accomplishment that I was able to achieve that I still kind of hang all of my ability to heal on. I would point to that and say, I would almost point to that as like a true north. Like, if you can get to this place, I think everything else will kind of take care of itself. And the place is this: I trust myself. And that's everything, because you're not going to know if you're doing it right. And you are going to make mistakes. I don't mean mistakes by some book. I mean, you're going to do things that don't prove to be helpful for you. You will do things that will feel like a waste of time when they're done. Oh, why did I even go there? You'll try to reconcile with someone and they won't have it. And they'll slam the door in your face and they'll hate you more than you thought they already did. And like, there will be a lot of points along the way where this won't look like a good story, because trauma does suck and it's really hard. It's not just a word that we go like, trauma means struggles. I mean, trauma is actually really, really difficult. Yeah. So I would just say, if somebody's like, where do I start? What am I aiming for? What should I use as a measure? I would say if you spend the early time, your earliest attention and energy doing whatever you've got to do, and I can't tell you what that is or how long it will take, but to get to the place where you could sort of look yourself in the eye or psychologically look yourself in the eye and say, I trust myself. Because part of the problem with religious trauma is your trust has just been shattered. It's been shattered in all these people who were supposed to be literally shepherding you. You think of a good shepherd and they're taking care of the sheep.
Speakers of truth.
And yet your shepherd was hitting you with the staff. Your shepherd was
choking you with it.
Letting a wolf in occasionally or whatever. So your trust has been shattered. But before they broke your trust in humanity, a lot of times, I know for me, they broke your trust in yourself first.
Yeah, you're desperately wicked.
Which is the whole, you're not good enough to have good ideas. You're not trustworthy. You're fundamentally...
Your goodness is a filthy rag. Yeah.
You're a filthy rag. So they start by taking away your ability to trust yourself. And then the next phase, which is the entire rest of it, is destroying your ability to trust in other people. And so for me, I think the first thing I would say that a person could, should, maybe ought to think about wanting to recover is the ability to trust myself. And when I say that, here's kind of practically what that means. It means I say to myself, I know that when I mess up, because I will, and that's not because I have original sin, it's because I'm human and humans mess up. We try things and some of it's not even a mistake. It didn't pan out, right?
Yeah. It's not right or wrong. It was different.
It just that's the way it is. Yeah. Those things, you can count on those things happening for the rest of your life. What you need to be able to do when those things happen is say, will I recognize when I've made mistakes and will I try to correct for them to the best of my ability? Will I cut myself a lot of slack? Will I give myself grace? But it's not just, will I be permissive? It's also, will I be tough on myself when I need to be? Will I demand something good of myself? Like, there are plenty of times where I could have been like, these people hurt me and I'm going to make them hurt. No. But part of trusting myself is going, I don't heal by hurting people. That's not what I'm here for. So trusting myself is saying, yeah, I can hurt them, but I don't want to hurt them. That would be like what they did to me. And I'm not like them. I'm like me. I recovered my goodness. So learning to trust yourself is learning to like take ownership of yourself, take ownership of your journey, and give yourself the grace, give yourself the forgiveness, and also be a little bit of the disciplinarian that you're going to need so that you don't go completely off the rails in either direction. And fundamentally, I really do believe that every single person has the capacity to do that if they want. They have the capacity to trust in themselves and figure it out. The community is really going to be helpful. I know you would probably agree with me when I say, I wish like heck that I had this resource when I was going through my deconstruction. I did
nothing
not.
Existed. No.
Nothing existed. We did a lot of this alone.
Yes.
This is part of the reason why we're doing this, because we're like,
Absolutely.
that part sucked, and we're not going to have that.
Exactly.
And that the existence of this trauma network, religious trauma network, the existence of it, for me, is an indicator that you trust yourself. And whether you think of it that way or not, you went out on a limb and you said, like, and you use that simple thing that even parents do, whether there's religion involved or not. Like, what happened to me when I was parented that I didn't like, and I'll correct for it by not doing that to my kids. It's literally that. So I think that's the big thing is do everything you can to get to a place where you trust yourself and in a way rely upon that trust. And then as soon as you get there, or I would even say while you're doing that, also, because you can do more than one thing at a time, also reach out and make contact with people who might be good allies for you, because you are going in. Part of trusting yourself is knowing that you're not going to be able to carry your own weight some days, and you're going to plan for those days before they come by making friends, connecting with a network, even getting a few people that I would say you can explicitly ask them, can I put your number on a call list? If like because I have you, all of you here at the network are on my call. I asked you, can I put you on my list of people I can call if my parachute is not opening and I need help? And you all said yes. And of course, we knew each other a little bit before I asked that. Yeah. But get to a place of trust, and while you're doing that, self-trust, and while you're doing that, build up a little bit of a protective circle of trusted people. Trust is everything. I mean, that really is it. Trust is everything. If you ever get into any part of your healing journey, especially when it comes to spiritual damage, and any person in your life asks you to suspend your trust or suspend your need to have it, or they ask you to just grant them trust, you are never obliged to do that. That is ultimately where the wounding started. And so trust is that thing that it's your essential goodness that you're relying upon. And being able to trust yourself is like that internal handshake where you say, I see the good in me and I'm counting on it to see me through. And so that's what I would say. What about you? What do you think is kind of an essential part of this for you?
The first thing would probably be to take a really deep, long breath and then do it a few more times. This is going to be a journey and a long ride. And so often, like, I hear people say, when will this be over? When am I going to be done with this? Well, like I told you with my Jell-O salad story, I mean, that was 17 years ago. And so this is a process. Part of why, again, the Religious Trauma Network, why we've created it is because I was told how to do this so many times. If you just follow these steps, you just do it this way, no, that really wasn't abuse, or no, that wasn't a cult, or just pray this prayer, just read these scriptures. You have to do it this way. You can't question your faith. You can't say that you're an atheist for a while and then go back and not be an atheist anymore. Like, everybody had very definite opinions. And so, like you were talking about trust, that was the very first thing. As I began deconstructing as a brand new mom, I believed I couldn't trust anyone. The people who loved me the most, the people who taught me since I was 5 years old, the people who if they're the ones who did this to me, they're the ones who taught me this theology, they're the ones who developed these abusive systems. If those people did it to me, why would I ever believe anybody else? Why would I ever trust anyone else? And so I didn't for a very long time. I trusted no one. I didn't even trust myself because, again, I was desperately wicked. And then I learned about some people still believe it's the Holy Spirit. Some people believe it's intuition or your gut. So wherever you land, that inner voice, learn to trust it. And so for me, it is once you learn to trust, like, it's okay to explore. It's okay to be curious. I believed that the sky was going to fall like Chicken Little. If I still remember the first time I was alone in my home with a man who was not my husband. It was a repairman who'd come to fix something. And I thought I was sinning and I should have had another woman over. And I thought, but my husband said it was okay. And I literally thought that something bad was going to happen to me, because we ended up having a conversation and it was nice. And I'm having a friendly conversation with the man who's not my husband. And the sky isn't going to fall. And the first time I changed a belief, I literally thought that God was going to strike me dead.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But it didn't happen. And so what you were saying about trust, that is very, very real. And so take your time. You're going to have to take breaks. And so if, like, I come from a fundamentalist background, and so my instinct was the pendulum swing. And you're going to say, here's what I believed, and this is the bad part, the harmful part, the toxic part, and you're going to swing. Your instinct is going to be swing all the way over to the other side, the opposite belief. So you got to watch out for that pendulum swing. And we also you're going to want to hurry up and replace, well, if this is bad, then where's the good one? Okay, well, that one is not so awesome, so where's the one that's better? You're going to want to constantly be changing your beliefs or your thoughts or your ideas. You're going to want to quickly replace. Now I've reconstructed, which is a word that I'm very careful to use, because then we reconstruct this whole system. And what's going to happen in another 15 years or 10 years? You might have to deconstruct again. So we need to very organically and carefully, without rushing, to hurry up and replace something that caused harm. Oh, that's better. And so I say a lot of times people stop at grace. When you leave a fundamentalist background or a controlling background, grace is a breath of fresh air, and it's necessary to get there. It's important to get there. But people stop there because it feels like, well, that's still within this theological boundary that lots of people are, and so we stop at grace because so many times that's all we can handle. And so if you recognize that this is a long process, it's okay to change your beliefs when you receive new information. And then don't just rush to replace. Take your time. Do lots of research. And then take breaks. Stop for months at a time. Stop. I'm not going to change my belief or read another book for 3 months. So anyway, that's kind of where I would go. Of course, there'd be more, but that would be my first, right out of the gate, instinct responses for someone.
Love that.
But yeah,
That's
and of
great.
course, follow us at Religious Trauma Network, because we're not going to push you in a corner, but we want to be with you as you heal and help you explore and become the person that you, and I would still say, are designed or were meant to be, as you autonomously make these choices without coercion.
I love it.
Yeah. Cool beans.
Well, I thought this was a really lovely conversation. I think it's, I'm smart enough to know because, and I know you are too, because we've both been down this road. Again, if we had something like this to listen to, it would have been really helpful.
Had I had the Religious Trauma Network when I first started my journey, I would have been skeptical. I would have been very cautious.
Oh, definitely.
I wouldn't have believed, well, what are they doing? And I don't understand. And so I hope that over time, though, we're able to create resources and point you to people, no matter where you are, no matter what religious background you're coming from, that we're able to provide resources that help you along this journey of whether it's deconstruction, coming out of spiritually abusive beliefs or theologies, or if you have experienced religious trauma, we want to be here for you.
And I know there are people who are going to be tagging along who love someone who is experiencing religious trauma. They're here to learn how to be a better support to someone who may themselves not even acknowledge that they're under, a religious trauma experience right now. So everybody's welcome. You don't have to say you have religious trauma to be a part of the conversation. Or the skeptics
who still say it's not a thing.
Yeah. Who still say it's not a thing. But I think it's great. I just want to thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this.
Absolutely.
And I'm excited to see where it goes. So
me too.
What can people do from here if they've seen this and they want to make contact? How does that work?
For sure. So we do have our website, which is religiostraumanetwork.com. And then for right now, we're over on Instagram and Facebook. and you can connect with us there. If you go to the website, you'll really learn a lot more about who we are, our platform, some of the core values and our guidelines for social media and all those things that we have very intentionally created to help make this a safe and supportive healing space for everyone.
And resources that we've all kind of touched along the way at various times. Like we're the whole point right now. I do think, I know we've talked some about maybe one day there will be workshops or conferences, or we'll speak at churches and help inform. Currently, we don't have all of that, but we are sharing resources that we think would be helpful. There's a lot of good stuff out there.
There's a resource page, and then if you click on each one of our bios, you'll see individual recommendations from each one of us. Because as we go along, you'll see how unique and individual and different each one of us are, and our, in our personalities, as well as where, our beliefs and what has supported us, what's helped us, and what's not. So, our individual bios and our resource page are there for you.
Awesome.
All righty. Thank you, guys. Right. And I look forward to healing forward together.
Love it. Thank you.